Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving deep into the reign of Queen Elizabeth I.
Oh, this is going to be good.
It is. It is. And you guys have given us this amazing lecture by an Italian history professor as source material, so
It is fascinating. I know.
really is.
So we're going to really unpack how England transformed under her rule, from a medieval kingdom into a burgeoning global superpower.
Yeah, it's really intriguing how much Elizabeth's reign was shaped by all the turmoil she inherited. Like Henry VIII's break with the Catholic Church.
Right.
That wasn't just about getting a male heir. I mean, it was like a seismic shift in power dynamics.
It really was. It seems way less about love and way more about a calculated political move.
Exactly. Henry defying the Pope to declare himself head of the Church of England. That had huge, long-reaching consequences.
Yeah, and even after all that, his pursuit of a male heir to avoid, another Wars of the Roses, that was still pretty precarious.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Anne Boleyn gives him Elizabeth, but still no son.
Then Jane Seymour finally has Edward VI, but then she dies shortly after.
Right.
So the line of succession, I mean, it's so unstable at this point, with each heir potentially bringing totally different religious and political leanings to the table.
Precisely. So you have Edward VI, he's raised Protestant, then Mary I, Henry's daughter with Catherine of Aragon. She takes the throne and tries to swing England back to Catholicism.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then she imprisons Elizabeth because she thinks she's plotting against her.
No way.
So by the time Elizabeth gets to the throne, the religious and political landscape, it's a powder keg ready to explode.
So Elizabeth inherits this kingdom that's like teetering on the edge of chaos. Talk about pressure.
Oh, yeah.
How does she even begin to navigate this mess, especially as like a young, unmarried queen?
That's where her strategy gets really fascinating.
Yeah.
So instead of it giving in to the pressure, she uses it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, she turns it into a tool by staying unmarried. The Virgin Queen becomes like this powerful symbol. It keeps potential rivals and foreign powers guessing. It keeps them on their toes.
It's such a masterful play, don't you think? Like, she takes what could be seen as a weakness and she
Yeah.
turns it into this huge advantage.
Oh, absolutely. This Virgin Queen persona was more than just a title. It really did help to keep England peaceful and stable, especially while the rest of Europe was busy with all these religious wars.
Right, right.
If Elizabeth had aligned herself with one particular suitor, she would risk alienating a huge chunk of her kingdom, and they would have been thrown right back into the turmoil of, the previous reigns.
It makes you wonder if there are any accounts of her, like, seriously entertaining any marriage proposals.
Oh, there were definitely negotiations and courtships, but Elizabeth never fully committed to anything.
Yeah.
There's even this anecdote about a group of monks at Westminster Abbey. They were chanting in Latin, and Elizabeth responds to them with this witty remark in English.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so she's basically acknowledging them, but also keeping her distance. It just shows how she could use humor and symbolism to navigate these really tricky situations.
It seems like she was very aware of the power of perception,
Yeah.
but like marrying for political gain was pretty standard for that time.
It was.
So how did she manage those expectations?
Brilliantly. She used that pressure to her advantage in international politics.
Okay, how so?
By staying unattached, she could string along potential suitors, and that strengthened England's position on the world stage.
So she was playing a very long game.
Oh, for sure.
But what about the religious divide? England was still reeling from those constant swings between Catholicism and Protestantism.
Yeah.
How did Elizabeth appease both sides?
Elizabeth was a master at finding balance.
Okay.
Instead of choosing sides, she positioned herself right in the middle, between Catholicism and Protestantism.
The middle way?
Exactly. And she reaffirms the Act of Supremacy.
Right.
So that solidifies her authority as the supreme governor of the Church of England, kind of like her father did.
Oh, so she's following in Henry's footsteps in that way.
She is. But instead of just outright rejecting Catholicism, she really cleverly weaves elements of both faiths into the new Church of England.
Oh, wow. So is that why she decided to revise the Book of Common Prayer?
Yes. By taking bits from both Catholic and Protestant traditions, she created this middle ground.
Right.
It might not have satisfied the extremists on either side, but it helped to keep the peace.
It's fascinating how she used religious doctrine as this tool for political stability.
Right. It's really clever.
It almost seems like she created the first broadly appealing big tent church.
Yeah, I can see that.
But was this approach effective in the long run? Were there any groups that pushed back against this middle ground?
Oh, there were definitely challenges. Elizabeth's policies largely prevented those huge religious wars that were happening all over Europe.
Right.
But England wasn't totally immune to religious and political tensions. In fact, she faced a pretty serious threat from someone who embodied all of those tensions.
You're talking about Mary, Queen of Scots?
Exactly.
The Catholic heir with a direct claim to the English throne. That must have been a terrifying situation for Elizabeth.
Oh, absolutely. Mary's claim, combined with her Catholic faith, made her this rallying point for English Catholics who didn't really see Elizabeth as the legitimate heir.
Right.
And there were multiple plots to try to overthrow Elizabeth and put Mary on the throne.
Wow. So how did Elizabeth handle such a direct and dangerous threat to her power? Did she try to reason with Mary or, find some kind of diplomatic solution?
Well, at first Elizabeth chose containment. She put Mary under house arrest, hoping to calm things down.
Right.
It was a risky move for sure. I mean, Mary still had a lot of symbolic power,
Yeah.
but as more and more plots against Elizabeth kept popping up, it became clear that she needed to do something more drastic.
So what did she do? Imprisoning Mary obviously wasn't enough to completely get rid of the threat, especially with so many people in England supporting Mary.
You're right. So eventually, after uncovering a really serious plot against her, Elizabeth made the tough decision to have Mary tried and executed for treason. This was in 1587. It was a decisive move, but obviously a very controversial one.
This is where we see Elizabeth's pragmatism kind of laid bare. She's not just some clever politician. She's a ruler who has to make these life or death decisions.
Right.
You have to wonder what that kind of pressure does to a person.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
But it also shows her unwavering commitment to keeping her throne and maintaining stability for the realm. But, while Elizabeth was often reacting to these religious and political crises, there's this one area where she takes a much more proactive approach.
You're talking about the rise of English sea power.
Yes.
I'm getting major Pirates of the Caribbean vibes here.
Huh.
This is where those famous English sea dogs like Francis Drake and John Hawkins enter the picture.
Precisely. Elizabeth saw the potential of the sea, both for trade and for challenging rivals like Spain.
Oh,
And she empowered these privateers to operate with the crown's approval.
that's smart.
Right. So she cleverly blurred the lines between private enterprise and national interest.
So basically state-sanctioned piracy.
Pretty much.
What were the implications of this strategy? Did it create any ethical dilemmas for Elizabeth?
I mean, the ethics are definitely complicated.
Right.
But there's no denying how effective it was. Privateering brought a ton of wealth into England.
Oh.
And it weakened Spain's control over the New World, and that contributed to the growth of England's own colonial ambitions.
And of course, this eventually leads to the clash with the Spanish Armada.
Right.
It feels like this was such a pivotal moment, not just a naval battle, but like a symbolic victory for England. Like this marked their arrival as a major player on the world stage.
You're absolutely right. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 was hugely symbolic. It solidified England's naval dominance. It signaled the end of Spain's reign as the undisputed ruler of the waves.
This is so fascinating. We're seeing how Elizabeth skillfully navigated these incredibly complex challenges. She's like this master political strategist, a religious reformer, and now a queen who sees the importance of sea power.
She was an amazing ruler.
She was. But it's also important to remember that while England was growing so much under Elizabeth's leadership, these changes weren't without their challenges.
Right.
The shift from this primarily agrarian society to one that was more and more reliant on trade and exploration
Yeah.
that brought about some major social and economic shifts.
Oh, yeah. Huge shift.
This is where we start to see the seeds of future revolutions being sown, wouldn't you say?
Precisely. Elizabeth's reign was this bridge between England's medieval past and its modern future.
Okay.
But even though she managed the immediate crises really well, some of her choices, especially in the economic realm, would have long-lasting consequences.
Woo, this is where it gets really interesting. Can you give us a little preview of what those consequences were and how they might have led to the upheavals that happened after Elizabeth's reign?
Okay, so one key factor was this thing called the enclosure movement.
Okay.
Basically a gradual shift from communal land use to private ownership.
Okay, so people are losing their land.
Yeah, and that led to more efficient farming and the rise of a new landowning class.
Yeah. Right.
But it also displaced a lot of people from rural areas, and that fueled social unrest.
This really challenges that romanticized image of Elizabethan England.
It does.
What were the real day-to-day challenges that people living through these changes had to deal with?
Well, life for a lot of ordinary Londoners was very different from the glamour and extravagance of the court.
Right.
I mean, overcrowding, sanitation problems, outbreaks of plague, these were everyday realities for so many people.
It's hard to imagine.
Yeah, and this economic upheaval combined with, all those religious and political tensions bubbling under the surface, this would ultimately set the stage for all the tumultuous events of the next century. But we'll dig into those consequences more after a quick break.
Sounds good.
It's kind of crazy to think about those huge estates and fancy houses being built while people were being forced off their land.
Yeah, it's like one group is benefiting from these changes while another is struggling just to survive.
Exactly. Imagine entire communities uprooted from the land they had relied on for generations.
Right? Like their whole way of life is just gone.
Yeah, and it's not just some ancient history thing,
Yeah.
It's a story that still resonates today with all the issues we're facing around economic inequality and land ownership.
It makes you think about the true cost of progress and who ends up paying the price.
Absolutely.
So did Elizabeth do anything to help the people who were displaced by all these economic shifts?
Yeah, she did try to address poverty with a series of poor laws.
Okay.
Think of it like an early form of social welfare, I guess.
Okay. Interesting.
These laws provided some assistance to people who were really struggling, and they set up workhouses.
So she was trying to find that balance between encouraging economic growth and taking care of the people who are being left behind.
Right.
But was she actually concerned about the poor, or was this just another strategic move to, keep things stable?
It's tough to say for sure what her true motives were. But the poor laws did represent a shift away from blaming poverty on individual failings.
So it was acknowledging that society had a role to play in helping people who were struggling.
Yeah. And Elizabeth's approach recognized that responsibility, even if it was partly driven by self-preservation.
It all comes back to her pragmatism.
Sure.
She seemed to understand that a stable society needs some sort of safety net, even if it's just to protect her own power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that some of Elizabeth's actions might have unintentionally paved the way for those revolutions that came later.
Right.
Can you talk about that a bit more?
Yeah, for sure. Like she seemed really good at managing relationships and maintaining that balance of power.
Oh, she was a master at it.
But how did that end up causing problems for the monarchs who came after her?
Well, Elizabeth was great at handling Parliament,
Mm-hmm.
but her successors, the Stuarts, not so much.
Really?
Yeah, they had a completely different idea of what it meant to be king.
Oh, how so?
They believe in this divine right of kings. They didn't really think they had to compromise with Parliament.
Oh, wow.
So all those tensions that were simmering under the surface during Elizabeth's reign, they just exploded under the Stuarts and led to the English Civil War.
So it was like Elizabeth's more collaborative approach, which worked really well for her.
Yeah.
Actually made things harder for the monarchs who came after her.
Pretty much. It's like a reminder that history doesn't always move in a straight line.
Right.
Even the best leaders can leave behind unintended consequences.
It's true. And Elizabeth's reign, while undeniably transformative, also had those seeds of future conflict planted within it.
Absolutely. It just shows how even the most stable-looking societies can have all these hidden tensions that eventually erupt.
Yeah, like a volcano waiting to explode.
Exactly. So we've talked a lot about the political and religious landscape of Elizabethan England. But what about daily life?
Mm-hmm.
What was it like to be an average person living through all this change and upheaval?
Yeah, paint us a picture of what life was like back then.
Well, life in Elizabethan England was full of contrasts. So you have the court, which is this dazzling spectacle of fashion and wealth.
Right.
But for ordinary people, life was often really difficult.
Yeah.
London especially was growing super fast. People were leaving the countryside to find work in the city.
So it was like a mini industrial revolution?
It was. But this rapid urbanization led to overcrowding. Sanitation was a big problem, and there were outbreaks of plague.
Oh my gosh, it sounds awful.
Yeah, it was a pretty tough time to be alive.
Yeah.
But there was also a sense of optimism.
You really?
Yeah, I mean, England was expanding its reach around the globe.
Right, with explorers like Francis Drake.
Exactly. And these voyages really captured people's imaginations. It was like a glimpse into this whole world beyond what they knew.
So even though life was hard, there was a sense of possibility in the air.
Yeah, like things were changing and the future was wide open. And this era also saw this incredible explosion of culture.
Oh yeah, with Shakespeare and Marlowe.
Exactly. They were writing plays that people still love today.
So was there something specific about Elizabeth's reign that encouraged this creativity?
It wasn't just a coincidence. Elizabeth's court was this hub of intellectual and artistic activity. Think of it like a magnet for talent, not just from England, but from all over Europe.
Oh, wow.
So she created this environment where creativity could flourish.
Even if she wasn't directly sponsoring every artist and playwright.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
this is where we see the influence of the Italian Renaissance taking root in England.
Oh,
You
interesting.
had all these Italian intellectuals who were fleeing religious persecution in their own country,
Right.
and they found refuge in Elizabeth's England.
So they brought their ideas and their art with them.
They did.
Hmm.
And they infused English culture with this new energy and perspective.
So England was having its own renaissance.
It was. And it was fueled by this incredible mix of ideas and talent.
Wow, it's amazing how all these seemingly unrelated things are connected. You have exploration, religious changes, economic upheaval, and this artistic flourishing all happening at the same time.
And that's what makes this period so fascinating. It wasn't just about politics and religion. It was about a fundamental shift in how people saw themselves and their place in the world. England was leaving behind its medieval past and stepping onto the global stage, and Elizabeth was leading the way.
This has been such an amazing journey through Elizabethan England.
It has.
We've seen how Elizabeth dealt with all those religious and political tensions, how she helped England become a global power, and how her decisions shaped the course of history.
Right.
We've also talked about the influence of the Italian Renaissance on English culture.
From grand architecture to tiny portraits.
Exactly. But there's one aspect we haven't really explored yet, the role of the Puritans during this time.
Ah, yes, the Puritans. They're such an interesting part of the Elizabethan story. To really understand their importance, we need to look at what they believed and why they clashed with Elizabeth's vision for the Church of England.
Yeah, because it seems like Elizabeth's middle ground approach to religion,
Uh-huh.
while it prevented widespread conflict, it didn't make everyone happy.
Exactly. The Puritans wanted a much more reformed Church of England, one that was completely free of anything they saw as Catholic. And they didn't like Elizabeth's compromises. They felt like she was betraying the true faith.
So they were pushing for a much more radical reformation than Elizabeth was willing to accept. How did she handle this dissent within her own church?
Well, Elizabeth, being the pragmatist that she was, tried to control the Puritan movement.
Okay.
She saw their demands for radical change as a threat to the stability she'd worked so hard to build.
Right.
So while she didn't persecute them on a large scale, she did use censorship, imprisonment, and exile to silence her most vocal critics.
It seems like Elizabeth, even though she's often portrayed as a pretty tolerant ruler, could be quite ruthless when she felt like her power was being threatened.
She could.
But did her attempts to suppress the Puritans actually work?
In the short term, yeah. Elizabeth managed to keep a lid on Puritan dissent during her reign. But, her approach might have actually made things worse in the long run.
Oh, so.
Well, but by pushing those frustrations underground, she might have inadvertently fueled the flames of discontent.
So it's like those tensions were just building up, waiting to explode later.
Exactly. And when you think about it, when the Stuarts took over after Elizabeth, their whole belief in the divine right of kings went directly against the Puritan desire for more religious freedom and participation.
Right.
So all that religious and political frustration that had been building up under Elizabeth,
Right.
it finally boiled over and led to the English Civil War.
So Elizabeth's attempts to maintain this delicate balance,
Yeah.
both politically and religiously, might have actually contributed to the very upheavals that she was trying to prevent.
It's a fascinating paradox.
It is. It shows how complex history really is,
Yeah,
and how even the best intentions can sometimes have unintended consequences.
it's true. But let's switch gears for a minute and talk about something a bit more positive.
Yeah.
What about the flourishing of art and culture during Elizabeth's reign? I know we've mentioned Shakespeare, but I'm curious to hear more about the specific ways the Italian Renaissance influenced English culture during this time.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. The Italian Renaissance, with its focus on humanism, classical learning, and artistic innovation, had a huge impact on England.
Okay, and it wasn't just about copying Italian styles. It was about a broader shift in thinking and creativity.
Can you give some examples of this influence? Like, how did it show up in English art architecture or even fashion?
Sure. So in architecture, there's a move away from the heavier Gothic styles
Right.
toward a more refined, symmetrical aesthetic inspired by classical Roman models.
So they're looking back to the ancient world for inspiration.
Exactly. And you see this shift in grand houses like Longleat and Burghley House.
Oh, I've seen pictures of those. They're beautiful.
They are. They have these columns, arches, and elaborate decorations that show a renewed interest in classical forms.
It's like England was getting a makeover.
It was. A more elegant and sophisticated style was emerging.
What about painting and sculpture? Did English artists just imitate the Italian masters, or did they develop their own styles?
There was definitely influence from Italian masters like Michelangelo and Raphael,
Of course.
but English artists started to develop their own unique style. Portraiture especially flourished during this period.
Oh,
Artists like Nicholas Hilliard and Isaac Oliver became famous for their miniature portraits. They captured the likenesses of courtiers and nobles in incredible detail.
it's like we can look through those portraits and see the faces of the Elizabethan era.
We can. And what about the everyday objects and clothing? Did the Italian Renaissance influence those aspects of life as well?
Yeah, I'm curious about that.
Oh, absolutely. All those Italian craftsmen and merchants brought new techniques and materials that transformed English fashion and design.
Oh, wow.
Elaborate textiles, intricate lacework, vibrant colors. These became super popular among the elite.
Like Elizabeth herself.
Exactly. Think of her in those amazing gowns with jewels and those big ruffs.
So she was like a fashion icon of her time.
She was. It's so different from the simpler styles of earlier periods.
Yeah, it's amazing to see how Elizabeth, whether intentionally or not, embodied this fusion of English and Italian aesthetics.
It shows how the Italian Renaissance wasn't just some abstract artistic movement.
Right.
It actually impacted everyday life.
But its influence went beyond just the visual arts.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Music and literature were also deeply affected.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, Italian madrigals and sonnets became really popular forms of entertainment.
Oh, yeah. I remember those from literature class.
And the very structure of English plays with their 5 acts and emphasis on dramatic conflict. That was influenced by Italian Renaissance theater.
It's incredible how this one period in Italian history had such a huge impact on another culture,
It is.
shaping everything from architecture and fashion to music and literature.
It really shows you the power of ideas to cross borders and generations.
And the Italian Renaissance was more than just a revival of classical learning.
It was.
It was about this spirit of inquiry, this willingness to question tradition, and this celebration of human potential.
Exactly.
And those ideas really resonated in England.
They did. And they contributed to all that intellectual and creative energy of Elizabeth's reign.
This has been an incredible journey through Elizabethan England. We've seen how Elizabeth handled all those religious and political challenges, how she helped England become a global power, and how her choices, both intentional and unintentional, shaped the course of history.
It's been quite a ride.
It has. We've also explored the amazing influence of the Italian Renaissance on English culture, from grand architecture to tiny portraits.
And everything in between.
Exactly. But there's one more thing we need to talk about. The role of Puritan reformers during this time.
Ah, yes, the Puritans. They represent this really interesting thread in the larger story of Elizabethan England.
Okay.
And to understand their significance, we need to take a closer look at their beliefs and why they clashed with Elizabeth's vision for the Church of England.
Yeah, it's fascinating how those seemingly small choices can have such big ripple effects across time. We've seen how Elizabeth's approach to Parliament really set the stage for conflict down the road. But let's circle back to those Puritans you mentioned. It seems like they were a group whose frustrations would only grow, especially with Elizabeth trying to keep them quiet.
Oh, absolutely. You hit the
Yeah.
nail on the head there.
Mm.
I mean, Elizabeth's middle-of-the-road religious policies did prevent those huge religious wars that were tearing Europe apart.
Right.
But it also meant that groups like the Puritans felt like they weren't being heard, like they were being pushed to the margins. Remember, these are people who wanted a truly reformed Church of England,
Right.
one that was completely stripped of anything that even hinted at Catholicism.
Okay.
They saw those compromises that Elizabeth made as a betrayal of their faith and their passion. Well, it wasn't going to just disappear overnight.
So Elizabeth wanting to keep things stable and in her control might have actually backfired.
It's a really strong argument.
Like, by trying to suppress dissent instead of dealing with the root causes, she might unintentionally set the stage for more conflict later on.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
Think about what happened when the Stuarts came to power after Elizabeth. Their belief in the divine right of kings,
Yeah.
it clashed big time with what the Puritans wanted. They wanted a say in how their religion was governed. So all that religious and political frustration that had been simmering under the surface during Elizabeth's reign,
Right.
well, it finally boiled over when the Stuarts took charge. And that led to the English Civil War.
It just goes to show that even the most brilliant leaders can't control everything. Sometimes those actions you take to keep things stable end up causing even bigger upheavals later down the line. So we've talked about Elizabeth's political skills, her complicated relationship with religion, and how her choices shaped history. It's clear that her reign was a major turning point for England. But how do we judge her legacy? Was she a force for good, or did she make things worse?
That's the big question, isn't it? And like most things in history, there isn't a simple answer. I mean, on the one hand, she guided England through this time of huge change. She navigated some pretty dangerous religious and political situations to create a more stable and prosperous nation.
Right.
She saw England become a global power.
Yeah.
She encouraged a thriving cultural scene. And she left behind a legacy that still fascinates people today.
She was a powerful and influential leader, for sure. But we've also seen how some of her choices, especially her focus on keeping things calm in the short term, instead of addressing the bigger problems, may have actually made things worse for the rulers who came after her.
Absolutely. It's a complex and fascinating legacy.
And that's what makes studying history so interesting.
It really is.
It's not about judging people or trying to find easy answers.
Right.
It's about wrestling with those gray areas, exploring those cause and effect relationships, and understanding that even the most influential people are shaped by their times.
It's all about context.
This deep dive into Elizabethan England has given me a lot to think about. It's been a journey through political intrigue, religious passion, economic shifts, and amazing artistic achievements. We've met larger-than-life figures, we've witnessed events that changed the world, and we've explored the complicated legacy of a queen who left her mark on England and beyond.
It's been a pleasure exploring this fascinating period with you.
It has.
And as we wrap up our deep dive, here's a final thought for you to ponder. History isn't just a list of dates and names.
Right.
It's a story about the choices we make and the consequences that follow, about our successes and failures, and about the human spirit trying to understand a world that's always changing.
It's a story that continues to unfold.
It does. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep discovering the rich and complex tapestry of the past.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through Elizabethan England. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into history's most intriguing corners.